Hey everybody, welcome to Mindful of Madness. My name is Andrew Ingram, and every week I talk to a different artist about the things they make and why they make them. This week on the show, I have a comedian, musician, filmmaker, raconteur, Johnathan Joubert with me this week, and we have a real good discussion about making stuff and the business of making stuff and pushing the envelope. It was a good time. I had a good time talking to Johnathan. uh he's one of those guys who's been around the scene for a couple years now, and I'm always really impressed with what he does on stage. And it was just good to sit down with him and talk to him one on one for, I think, probably the first time. And you should definitely check out all of his work. Jason and the Voorhees is his band. He does solo work as Johnny Hopeless, and he's just a hilarious stand-up every time I get to see him. So definitely check out Jonathan's stuff. As for my stuff, as always, mindfulofmadness.com for the writing. Um, this was a bad idea on Spotify and iTunes and all of those places. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show, because that's how these things grow. And I really need this to grow, guys. I have big plans, and this is part of it. So I'm trying to make it as good as I can, and the people got to see it. So help me out. All right, let's get into my conversation with Johnathan Joubert. Hey, everybody, it's Mindful of Madness. What's up? I'm your host, Andrew, from the intro. It's still me. I haven't sold the show to anyone yet. And with me this week is a really, really funny dude who, kind of a multi-talented guy who has brought comedy into just a bunch of different avenues. It's Johnathan Joubert, everybody.
Hey, bro. I appreciate the nice words for sure.
Yeah, how's it going, man?
It's good. It's good. I'm
Good.
appreciating. I'm appreciating snow over flooding all day long.
Yes.
So
Yes. Although I'm not appreciating how warm it got today. If you're everyone's listening to this in the future, but here in Colorado Springs, we're in the midst of a snowstorm. So if the internet goes out, you may be getting half an episode today. um, but yeah, we're in the middle of a snowstorm, and the problem here is it got up to like above freezing today,
yeah,
and the snow is still coming down, so everything's just going to be ice underneath. It's going to
I
be
know.
real bad.
And having to learn the hard way that if you don't shovel it immediately, you're just screwed for like another week.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, unless you have salt,
Right.
you gotta go to the store and get some. I think we
Yeah.
have some at the house. I shoveled, at like 10 a.m. this morning, and it's just all back now.
Yeah. I just give up. I wait until it's stopped, and then I'm just like, we'll do the best we can, and I'll move on.
Yeah, it's kind of a losing battle no matter what you do.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, Jonathan, had you started doing comedy here in the Colorado Springs, what, about 2 years ago now?
Yeah, it's been about 2 years, a little bit, 2 years in October.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously with COVID and everything, not a lot's been happening, but
No, but anytime there was that opportunity where was the space in between, like I made sure to jump out there because it was just one of those things where, unlike music, you kind of have to test it a little, like you have to have an audience to test it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of curious. I know there are some people who are hitting it a lot harder
Yeah.
than I am right now. and I've gone out to shows here or there just to kick
Right.
the tires, and all fairly socially distanced and responsible shows, but
Yeah.
um it's there's just you could tell every time, oh, there's rust here, and
Oh,
I just wonder how much of that is just, oh, I need a couple weeks of steady, open mics to get back into it, and how much of it is actual atrophy that's going to take weightlifting to get back. Does that,
yeah,
like,
man. I kind of think about that from the aspect of the performative side, because it's one of those things where if you're not comfortable talking in front of people, if those people disappear for a little while, you got to get accustomed to it again. That was one of the things I thought was
yeah.
fantastic about night after night after night. It's just like, you're hitting all these different audiences, hitting all these different people, and you can kind of start to gauge what's working and what's not working. But if you only get to hit it once a week and it's nothing but comics who've heard your joke 1,000 times, it makes it a little trickier.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
cool to keep. It's good to keep working on the new stuff, but again, it's like you get the original hit. I always find when something comes out of left field and it really works, you'll get the hit whether or not it's comics or standard audience members. But I think comics always watch for a different thing when other comedians are performing.
Right. Well, and if you're doing, for me, it will take anywhere from 3 to 30 shows to get a joke right, you know like to really nail it, and they're just some jokes that, like, I believe in and I think they're gonna work eventually. I just have to figure it out, and sometimes by the time I know they're right, comics are just so sick of them that, like, you never want to do them again, not at
Yeah,
least not until you're at, like, real gigs with real audiences that haven't heard it before, because
right.
everybody's so sick of it.
It feels that way with like I have to remind myself of that because there's just something about a song or something that pulls you in a way that's different.
Hmm.
So you can hear the same chord progression over and over, and you're going to feel the same way about it. But
Yeah.
that's not the way with jokes. That's not the way with insight.
Right. There have been times in my life where I've listened to the same song every day for 6 months,
Yeah, man.
and for whatever's going on in my life, it's an important song at the time, and I
Right.
never get sick of it. Whereas, my favorite comedy albums in the world, I don't want to listen to more than once or twice a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, for sure. Like, there's not very many that can kind of do that. Like anyone that'll hold the attention, because part of, at least for me, part of the comedy side of it is the insightfulness. Like, I like the really heady stuff and the blue. Like, I'm a big fan of, can you make something morally questionable funny?
right.
But in order to do that, it's the surprise, it's the shock factor. But once you've heard the shock factor and the surprise, you know, at that point it's coming. So you already know.
Yeah. There's Once you get the beats of a joke, it's just not it's not satisfying anymore.
Right.
It's the I think the only art form, I think I've said this before, and I don't even think it's an original thought. I think I probably picked it up somewhere. But I think the only art form that's less repeatable than stand up is magic.
Right. Right.
Like, it's
Yeah.
like magic. That first time you see it, you're like, holy shit. And then the second time, you're always looking for the trick.
Right. Trying to figure
And
out how it works. Yeah.
and that ruins it. Whereas, with stand up, you hear a joke and it's really funny the first time. And then
Yeah.
the second time, maybe you pick up on something you didn't the first time. And maybe you even enjoy it the third time. But
Right.
after that, you're done. Like
It's just an
that's
offensive TED talk at that point.
exactly. It's like, geez, he sure is saying the F word a lot.
Right. Yeah. Trying to really nail home how much he doesn't want to feed his kids.
Yeah. So, I mean, what so what started, because you're a comedian, you're a musician, you're a comic musician,
Right, right.
and you're a filmmaker. What came first for you?
Musician. I started doing music when I was 9 years old. I started playing the trumpet until I got kicked out of symphonic band because I hated marching band.
Hmm.
And, I went through a terrible breakup like all teenagers do and picked up the guitar.
Hell
And
yeah.
then I was homebound for a while, so I would play guitar for like 10 hours a day, like for real 10 hours a day. And it was because school was only like twice a week, so I'd get all my work done in the first 2 days. And then I would and that's when I realized that public school was garbage where I was from too. Like if I knocked out the entire senior year in 4 weeks,
Wow.
like how bad is it really?
Yeah.
And so then I would just play music all the time. And then eventually I had a friend of mine who was an amazing drummer, and he was in this band with a lot of really talented musicians. And I convinced him to just start jamming with me because it would help me practice, going over scales. And then I also liked different music than they liked. And so he was like, well, I'd like to learn how to do double bass and do a lot more of the heavier stuff. So let's just work on that together. And then we ended up playing music together for like a decade.
Yeah, yeah. And you're a heavy guy. Like you play metal. What so what drew you into like the did you start doing comedy before you started like the Johnny Hopeless character and doing like comedic music?
So the beginning of my comedy excerpts was I had started working with a film company called Catch 22, and
Hmm.
I was the head of the audio department. So I was doing and blah blah blah, but then I would do Foley or voiceover, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. And I wanted to do a documentary about Louisiana comedy because it was just really starting to take off out of nowhere. It was like one day I woke up and all of a sudden there were like 15 comics in this town of like 60,000 people, 80,000 people, which
Yeah.
is a lot, you know.
Yeah.
And then the open mic, and that was the comics that were doing it continuously. And then there was like another 20 or 30 that were just open micers.
Right.
And
I mean, that scene's basically the size of the spring scene,
right,
and there are 10 times that many people who live here.
right. And it was weird. So I talked to the owner of the company, and I was like, man, I want to start filming and get some interviews and just talk about how this came about, what's people's inspiration, et cetera, et cetera. And none of them would talk to me honestly. They were all trying bits all the time. And one of my friends, I mean, I've had a lot of friends because I'm always been the guy who just cracks jokes and the class clown. And they're like, man, you should just get up there. And once I did that, then they actually started to talk to me like a person.
Yeah.
And I did it for a couple years because I just enjoyed it and it was giving me a lot of content. And there's this one night in particular where things were starting to slow down, but but there were a lot of comics. And so they started to really fight for time on stage.
Hmm.
And I was just there to drink a beer and hang out with my new friends and film some shit. And I just felt like I was stealing this extremely valuable time from other people, and I had no interest in this as a career. So it was just like, am I going to stick here and literally take these people's tool to actually make themselves better, or I'll just go back to my world? And that's kind of what I did. So I just started doing, and I'd always been doing music during that time as well.
Hmm.
Um, but it just kind of, I started focusing more on the music and editing video stuff again, and not so much on the comedy, and took a break from that for a couple of years. And then when we were looking to move up here, um, I'd had, by that time I'd been doing that Jason and the Krugers for about 10 years. And that was always a musical comedy thing. You know, it was always like punk rock attitude. Everybody talks with the same silly accent. We all have characters. Everybody's a trope. And we all had, we had a rough outline, but we were allowed to riff. So, I mean, you'd go to our show and we would play, you know, maybe 45 minutes of material, 50 minutes, but the show would be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because we're just we're going off. And people forget, like that was one of the things that was really cool about it is we never had a complaint about that at all. People just would come up after the show. They'd love it because we decorate whatever venue all Halloween style and just make it really our own and creepy and brought you into this whole world. And because I was moving, we speed dated to come up here. And I went to Fort Collins and my wife was just like, man, if you're going to go do open mic, you should go do it as Hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, man, you know what? That'd be pretty cool because I can pull off a couple of these songs acoustically and it would be really funny.
Yeah.
And so I did that in Fort Collins. And a gentleman who just passed away, his name is Doug. He was kind of like, was well versed in the scene up there. And he really just took to it. I was like, man, you should do this more. And so then I started doing it more. And then it was weird to get into the scene because it's musical comedy. You've seen it. So it's the musical comedy thing, right? But and this isn't to brag. It's because I know I practice. So I know I don't suck as that character. Like right. I know I can play the instrument. I know I can sing at the same time. I know I can make them have a good time. But convincing a group of comics that there's something there when you're the only one with a guitar that night pisses them off.
Yeah.
It throws the vibe, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's a stigma there for a reason, and it's because right. there are a lot of bad guitar comics who aren't right. musicians who play 3 chords right. and don't write good jokes.
Right.
You know, like I think Nick Thune's a good comic. Nick Thune was a much better comic after he put his guitar down.
Yeah.
Do you know who Whitmore Thomas is?
Name sounds familiar, but I'm unsure.
He's a LA comic, but he grew up in like punk rock and metal bands in Georgia. Gotcha. So yeah, okay. Probably he put out an HBO special that isn't the best comedy special I've ever seen, but he has a lot of music in it, and the strongest suit about the special is he is a talented musician who is also a talented stand-up, and so he's doing he's not approaching either one less seriously than the other, which I think I could say the same about you is, you know, yes, it's a character, but that character's actually a good guitar player. The songs have a structure that isn't just a formulaic, I can play these 3 chords in different...
The same 3 chords.
The same 3 chords in every song with slightly different tempos.
Right.
And you know, frankly, most guitar comics sound like a worship team leader.
Absolutely, dude. They remind me of so many shitty pastors. That's what it reminds me of. Perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, so you said the Jason and the Krugers was around for 10 years before you moved up here?
Oh yeah, man. So that band got started because I had an idea for a song, and I was also testing out gear. So like the very first song we wrote was me and a buddy of mine, and I used no amps because that was when amp modulation was just kind of getting started. And then I just bartered with this other guy who I'd recorded an album with. So he knocked out the drums. We're like, man, this is actually pretty fun. And then the drummer that I played with in my youth most of the time, he was getting deployed. And so I was like, dude, you could die. Like, why don't you come over and let's just knock out a bunch of songs. And I mean, that's how we talk to each other.
Yeah,
But it's true. And so he hadn't played. He had just gotten done with basic. He hadn't played in months. And so he came in and we had these rules, and it was like, all right, no twinkly dinks, which is what we told him, because he was a very good drummer, so he would show off.
Yeah.
And he had, 40 cymbals on a set.
Yeah.
And then it was like, no twinkly dinks, woes in every song, because drunk people don't give a shit about your lyrics. And the time it takes to write your lyrics can't be longer than the time of the movie. So if the movie's an hour and a half, you have 90 minutes to write these lyrics. And if it sucks, you're just gonna be repeating shit. And those were our rules. And we wrote 10 songs in 2 days, and then he fucking shipped off. And it was always like this kind of hokey project that we would do every once in a while. And the drummer from a symphonic metal band I am, which is like called Psychometry, it was like this technical band with a full choir, and we had a string section and all kinds of stuff. And the drummer for that was like, man, Walking Dead had just come out. We went and we got invited as Jason and the Krugers to go to South by Southwest for some of the off performances, and ended up getting a lot of exposure from like X Games, and like I think Hannibal Buress was filming us, and like our bass player is the hugest fan, but he couldn't break character. But as soon as he walked away, he's like, oh my God, he's like freaking out, right? And so we ended up getting a lot of it, because it's a weird, if you haven't seen it, it's a very weird thing to stumble upon in day-to-day life. And that's what we were doing. It was like just walking down the street following cops, and it's a bunch of zombies and murder guys, playing songs about ass to mouth. You're going to draw some attention. And the drummer was like, man, monsters and zombies are hot, and it's a 4-piece band. We can go anywhere and do anything in one day, as opposed to having to drag all 9 of us around to try to make this shit work. And I was like, you know what, man, that's a very good point. And so we just started working more on that, and just releasing a bunch of stuff and really creating stage shows and different things like that.
Yeah. What's the most elaborate shit got? Because there's like, just even you by yourself, it's more elaborate than most people are willing to get at an open mic.
Right. Yes.
Oh, hold on a sec. I think you're freezing up a little bit.
Hours before the venue open. Yeah.
Oh, just give it a sec to catch up.
I'm just being very still.
Yeah. I think we're okay now.
So I'll have to maybe submit you some of the live videos, because we put some of it up there, so you should see the whole thing. But basically it was themed. So the prom night was probably the most chaotic, because we got someone to donate their limo for contest winners, and it was this dead prom. And then we showed up to the venue and we filled all these probably like 80 balloons with fake blood and hung them from the ceiling, and then a bunch of stars and streamers, and then severed arms and legs and heads. And then we had our projectors on the side, so whatever we would sing about, you'd see the movie, or our own video that we shot to make fun of the movie. And then by the end of that show, like, somebody pulled out a knife and just started stabbing the balloons, and everybody was just covered in blood. And we ripped off, like, we had some old trellis, so we just basically jacked a bunch of old trellis we found on the side of the road and wrapped it up and made it like the photography section for all the dates. And so it was just stuff like that. And then we did all the shows were just that kind of thing. It was like, we wanted people, when we played, when you showed up to the sports bar, it wasn't the sports bar anymore. It was like this horror Halloween adventure, and you either come on the journey with us or you're going to have an unhappy time, and we'll make fun of you for it.
I was going to say, like, for people who aren't performance artists, when you're gigging, a lot of times you are working in those kind of those sports bars, those spaces where I would say maybe 50% of the patrons might not know there was going to be a show that night.
Yeah, bro, easily.
Yeah.
And that's
How did people respond when they did not know what was going on?
um, I mean, honestly, it was always really good because it was
Yeah.
just, I think when you see people put in that much effort to entertain you, you got to give it up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's the same kind of thing. Like all the guys in that project, it's the same kind of attitude where we all pretend like we suck, but then we actually don't. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
we make fun of each other, we goof off. The music's all super easy because it's meant to be catchy and have hooks that people can sing along with. But then every once in a while, you'll just throw out a solo that you can't deny. They actually know their scales.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Uh, so we've never really had anybody completely turned off. I was once. We had this show in New Orleans, and I thought that was happening, and I saw these three chicks just they walked in, and it was like this it was a duplex bar, right? So there's a bunch of beer on one side, there was like the world beer, and there's the draft on the other side, and they walked in and they just all stopped and their mouths just dropped and they were just like, what the fuck is happening? And they started to leave. So of course we started calling them out from the stage. And then I felt like a big asshole because what they were doing was going outside and they dragged in like 8 other people
Oh,
with
nice.
them. You know, like they were just like in absolute shock. And it was like for some bridal party or something, you know? So they had the time to spend with all these funk and jazz musicians. And instead they're just spending it with a bunch of yokels playing punk and metal.
That's funny, because it's kind of a well-known trope at this point, but bachelorette parties are the bane of a comedy show's existence.
Yes.
Go if a bachelorette party shows up at a comedy club, it's a bad night most of the time. I and I remember like this was open mic night at the Zodiac, and somebody brought their bachelorette party to that for some reason. And it's like
Right.
that this is not what you should be doing. Like this is a beautiful thing. It's my favorite room and everything, but
Right.
not what you should be doing for your bachelorette party. And it was a bad time, and the only time I've had a good bachelorette party experience was I did comedy on a drag show at the gallery below, which you did my
I
show
love,
there, right?
yeah, yeah, I love that place, dude.
Yeah, no, it's fucking rad. And I did one of the drag shows there, and there was a bachelorette party, but they were so on board. They were just
Right.
on board with I fucking love those drag shows because everybody who's there is completely on board with whatever
Yeah,
happens.
man, it's a good time. Like the whole thing is that's the fantasy and all willing suspension of disbelief. Like if you
Yeah.
go there and you have an attitude, it's kind of like I tell everybody with the Johnny Hopeless character. Like when I get up there as me and I do my set, um, and people don't like it, it's like, okay, I need to go back and work on this. You know, like, and
Right.
I know where it is. But if I have a set with Hopeless and you get mad about that, I really just think of it as your fault, you know, because like there's some things where it's not going to be for everybody, but if you see a big ass zombie come on stage and start talking shit and you have a problem with that, you're intentionally not becoming part of the joke.
Right.
You're intentionally working to get out to not have fun at that point.
Yeah, there's the opportunity to get on board there
Right.
for
Right.
everybody.
Yeah.
Like, a human being's sensibilities can be one thing, but like that character is so outlandish
Right.
and so big that it's like obvious all of this is beyond the pale.
Right. Right. And that's the thing too. It's like even when I say a lot of the stuff up there, like the whole background of that character is he's extremely amoral. I don't even want to say immoral. He's very amoral. You know, like that. He's a pleasure-seeking character who wants to do good, but he just can't. Like everything
He's
he,
like Pinhead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to give you immortal life. It's just gonna be the worst kind. You know?
Yeah. Everything's about pleasure to the point where it's gotten it's gotten real
Right.
dark.
Where now you got to get choked out so you can
Yeah.
come.
um, how do you make a decision when you're going out to do a show, whether to be yourself or to be Johnny Hopeless? Is it just
It,
whatever you have to work on that time?
yeah. Like, so for Hopeless, because it's such a niche market, right? Like,
Mm,
um, I've got like maybe 30. If I started doing more music, I would have a fuck ton of material, right?
yeah.
But because I don't have the rest of the band up here, and I'm building more musicians. Um, I'm trying to get the comedy side down too,
Hmm.
and so it really just kind of depends on if I'm working on a new bit. And sometimes I got caught because someone recognized me doing a Hopeless bit, because I try to do it a little bit, because if I can make you laugh as me doing this fucked up bit, then I
Yeah.
know it'll be fine with Hopeless. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so with him, I try to do like, every other week, or maybe once a month,
Hmm.
just to keep it going, but not oversaturate the market. And then like, one of the things I'm happy about it open up again is because there are all these different places where people do open mics, and they're so different. It doesn't get oversaturated as fast as, say, if I were back in Lafayette and there was just like a venue that allows you to do comedy. It's going to be the same 30 people, and they're going to
Yeah.
get tired of it in fucking 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of where it is. Like, I'm working on some new songs for Hopeless, and I get real like, I just really try to compartmentalize it. You know
Mm,
what I mean? And with the stuff for me, I like pushing the envelope personally, but I also need it to relate to real life experiences.
mhm.
But with Hopeless, I don't have to do that. With Hopeless, it's like he can be the drug addict, prostitute, having, you know,
Yeah.
going to prison dude, and it can all be amusing. But with me, I want to have like some reference to reality in it.
Mhm. How close to reality? I mean, because I think about this a lot when I'm writing jokes, because a lot of what I do, or what I do on stage, has some basis in experience.
Right.
But there are jokes I have that take an experience and blow it up,
Yeah.
to the point where it's like, this isn't actually what happened anymore. It might get a little either things get simplified down so there aren't too many moving parts,
Right.
or I had a conversation that sparked an idea, or an incident that sparked a larger idea that definitely
Yeah.
didn't really happen.
Yeah,
um
and I think that's there's place for that. I mean, one of my favorite things I ever heard a comic say was that we exaggerate to clarify,
yeah.
and that was for me, such a profound thing, because it's exactly like what you're saying. Is it has to be somewhat related to my life, and
Yeah.
whether that's related to a thought, related to an experience, related to other people that I've known, that that's what I mean when I say related to a thought. Like, it's something that comes from me, whether or not it's real or not. It's, some absurdity that I considered.
Mhm.
Whereas with the other one, it's just all out the window.
Yeah, it's just as bonkers as you possibly
As,
get.
as bonkers as the audience will let me take it. Like, I've had
Yeah.
faces where I've climbed on a table and fucking did the cross thrust, the crotch thrust in someone's face while I'm singing a song, and they're all about it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't do that during my comedy set as Johnathan, and just get up
Right.
there on somebody's table and start fucking, face humping them.
Yeah. um what are the things that excite you to talk about on stage as yourself?
Um, whew. As myself, oh man, making fun of society's norms. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that's exciting, because um, I took a challenge from a comedian years ago. I don't even know if he's still performing, but he was talking how there's no conservative comedians, or everybody seems to be very uber liberal, which would make sense, right? Because you're supposed to mock the traditions. And that's the whole point of comedy, right? And so I've always been like that libertarian person, definitely not the conservative. I would got such shit from them most of my life, being in the metal world and being in Southern Louisiana, you know? So it's not like I have a love for them, but what I found was that that was the challenge. So it was like, oh, now I've got to try to write something funny that is probably nothing that I even remotely believe. But if I can do it correctly, it'll be almost like that Stephen Colbert thing, like where,
Right.
you know, like the joke, what I really is working on at this point right now is to be the straight-laced guy who does it for all the wrong reasons, you know? So like I'm married and I'm going to stay with my wife who I love. And I think marriage should last forever, especially because she has a really good life insurance policy, you know, and it's going to be like things like that. Like I have 2 kids, you know, and you play on the kids thing, but it's like, well, I have the kids because I can't walk that long for trick or treating anymore. And I'd get 10%, you know, it's just like little, that kind of thing where I want to push the envelope on that, because while I do value some, I guess, rational or reasonable traditions of things that work, I also still think they need to be mocked, because humanity is just absurd. You know, like my starting point is that we're all just mammals that are rationalizing. You know, we're not very rational. We're rationalizing creatures. So I like making fun of that a lot. And I like picking on concepts that most people have but haven't thought about. You know, like one of my favorite bits is talking about love, and how it was really hard growing up not believing in unconditional love. You know, like there is no such thing as unconditional love. And then some people would say, well, Johnathan, you know, what about the love between a mother and their child? And I always respond that, yeah, I used to believe in that until you bitches started driving them into the lake, you know? It's just like, it's that kind of fun
They
thing.
didn't say it was healthy. They said it was unconditional.
Right. Well, and that's a good, see, right? That's a great comeback on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
something and this isn't necessarily performance related unless somehow it becomes a bit, but just something I want to talk about. Talking about how we are just mammals that rationalize. We're animals that by whatever trick of evolution or spark of divinity or whatever, you know, had the ability to become creative, right? And every other creature that almost gets there fucking dies.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's fascinating, because like cephalopods are probably the closest to humans in intelligence on as far as I know on the planet. And then they have their babies and basically waste away.
Yeah.
You know, they have because their intelligences are so great that they can't think of a reason for living after they procreated.
I think I lost you for a second. There we go.
Are we good?
Yeah, now we're good.
Okay. Yeah, man, the snowstorm's probably fucking things up. So I haven't really had a lot of problems doing these over Zoom, but yeah. Anyway, I was just saying, like, the octopi and other cephalopods will generally have their litters or their babies or whatever they have, and then just kind of give up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's I think the difference too with the ability to forethought and recognize death. And I think that's been the driving force for human beings. Like one of the things I do, and it does relate to entertainment, is one of the other things I'm excited about is mocking cultures and mocking the notion of people unwilling to trade cultures. Because like when I was pursuing my degree in psych, one of my favorite classes was social psychology, and we talked exactly about the evolutionary phenomenon of human beings to transmit culture in a way that other creatures don't. And that's what allowed us to, you know, basically maintain dominion as the top,
Mhm.
for lack of a better word, top species on the planet. Because unlike they had this awesome study with chimps where they would use grub. They would use a stick to get grubs right
Mhm.
out of a log, but they wouldn't teach it to anybody else, right? So that knowledge that made everybody's life easier was just like, nah, fuck y'all, this is mine,
Yeah.
and then and that's it. But with
Yeah.
human beings, if you take a look about at all the amazing things we do because we're willing to share that information, and because we learn what behaviors are efficient and inefficient, and then decide the morality after the fact.
Mhm.
Um, it's just allowed us to get a lot further, and
Yeah. Well, and this skirts on that discussion that's been happening for the past 10 years about appropriation.
right.
And like I grew up overseas, and so I have kind of a different like outlook on it.
Right.
Or not even like, because white bitches at Coachella wearing headdresses, pr- probably some issues there that we need to address. Like there's
I just look at it as you're wearing a costume, and that's
yeah,
it. You know?
sure, but like I understand the thought process that gets to that being offensive.
Yeah.
But like when the um but not every culture sees it that way.
Right.
And in America, we assume, if like when the Canadian Minister wore the traditional Indian garb when he was
Yeah.
visiting India,
Yeah.
they saw that as honoring their culture. And then
Right.
he, just gets dragged when he gets back to Canada. And it's like,
Yeah.
I I understand why Canadians think that, but maybe ask everybody in India what they think about it before
Well,
you.
maybe the natives in fucking Canada shouldn't be concerned how the people in India feel about their own culture.
Right.
That's how I kind of look at a lot of that. Is there's a lot of do-gooderism that has nothing to do with people, so they don't have to focus on their own insecurities, and they
Yeah.
use it for that. I think the legitimate conversation about cultural appropriation was whenever people were allowed to profit and that own culture was not allowed to profit. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that to me is, yeah, that's the actual conversation. The I'm wearing a costume from people that die, and like and I actually have a lot of friends that are native. So one of my favorite things is whenever I hear people talk about Native Americans, I'm like, well, which tribe? You know, because
Yeah.
not all of them had that headdress. You're mad because you fell into this television version of what you think Native Americans were like, and you believe the noble savage doctrine and the like we didn't have, like Europe didn't have a war with these people for 400 years. Like these weren't some of the most badass hunters and warriors that existed on the planet. You want to come in and pretend that some people walked in and just decimated it, and it's like it's not realistic, and that's the thing I make fun of, is kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the exaggerate to clarify, right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, we should talk about actual social issues, but some of the social issues you're talking about are so low on the totem pole.
Right.
Like my
Right.
brother's black, and one of the things we were talking about was when all this shit started going off, he was like, man, I don't want white people to do something for me. I just want them to get the fuck out of my way. you
Right.
know and I was like, thank you, I totally agree. Because one of my favorite conversations, and the most memorable one, was when the Trayvon Martin incident happened, and he was like, can you believe that fucking bullshit? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I can't believe they're assuming that all black people are going to riot and burn a city down just because they don't like a court case. And he was like, I didn't even think about that. That's way more racist. I was like, yeah, I know. That's the shit I'm concerned about, is these stereotypes that have been set for a very long time that
Mhm.
people don't know how to let go of, and it creates a prejudice that crosses cultures, that
Yeah.
crosses American cultures. And those are the things I want to tackle. But at the same time, I also want us to be realistic and not view everybody as their world's going to come down and shatter because so and so uttered the wrong blasphemy word.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, it's, the whole J.K. Rowling thing. Like, J.K. Rowling's canceled. And,
Right.
like, sure, I think everybody who's mad at her has a right to be mad at her. I think she's said some very ignorant things. I also think that those ignorant things are held by all of our mothers.
Yeah.
And, like, every single one of your mothers thinks the exact same thing as J.K. Rowling. And maybe you should talk to your mom and not worry about her.
Right. And not try to destroy a piece of literature because the author had a view that you found
Right.
distasteful, you know? It's ridiculous. And especially for me, the hardest part is seeing comedians that start to back it. Like, we can't back blasphemy laws. You can say you should be critical about the way you think. And like everybody says, are you being funny? That's the number one thing. You can say whatever you want as long as you're attempting to make people laugh. And
Right.
that's a fundamental difference. And I've seen a lot of the dark comedians, um, like, and I appreciate it. I appreciate when they kind of like double down and they're like, no, I'm trying to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me how to talk. Don't tell me what I can and can't say. I'm working on figuring it out to make it funny because it's a part of my experience too. And the whole weird subjective my lived experience argument seems to work only when someone else is mad at you. Like,
Yeah. I think, I don't know, cause like I kind of see it like as it's okay not to like something too.
mhm,
And it's okay not to like something because you find it offensive.
absolutely.
Where I have a disconnect is I'm like, okay, well, this person should be thrown in jail. And
Right.
I don't think, like, and it's like, Dave Chappelle's one of the greatest comedians who's ever lived, maybe the greatest comedian who's ever lived. And he's made a lot of jokes in his last few specials that people have a lot of problems with. And I think those
Yeah.
people should have problems with them. Like, that's fine. And
Right.
I do think he's been kind of a little bitch about how, oh, people are trying to cancel me. But nobody's actually canceled Dave Chappelle.
Well, because he can't be, right. He's got the fan base and all of that. And
But
and
like, even so, like, nothing he's said has actually hurt him in any way.
right,
I don't
right. And
like, yeah. I just don't know that I buy the cancel culture argument really as hard as people.
well,
There
it's there, but it's a very small minority of people who do it, but they're very active and have nothing to do.
Yeah.
And I look at them as the same way I looked at the evangelicals where I'm from. Oh, you don't like it? Turn the channel. Stop trying to get me to not watch what I like. you
Yeah.
know and that's what I think most people mean when they talk about cancel culture, because you might fail, but I mean, literally, if you are offended by a comedian and you live in Mississippi, why are you calling Georgia, a club in Georgia, to make that person not work?
Mhm.
Just don't go. Don't like
Right.
it. Tell your friends how much you think it sucks. But
Yeah.
to me, it just stinks of another religion that I ran away from you know
Well, that has been very interesting to me. The evangelicalization of liberalism.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
which I'm not, like, again, I'm a really liberal guy. I also still consider myself a Christian. So
Yeah.
I just kind of hate aspects of both.
Yeah, well, dude,
I
I didn't hate Christianity. I hated Christians. You know,
Right.
like Jesus was fine.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem reading any of the text there and be like, yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
It's the people that, because they lack their own discipline and their own self-esteem, that they want to dominate everybody else to be the soul saver, that I have
Mhm.
issue with. Because most of those people, you know, it's different in, I guess, dealing with the religious evangelicals, because there's more dogma to tackle, right?
Right.
Whereas the modern secular evangelicals, it's kind of all over the place, and it's only starting to kind of, um, coalesce. It's only now being
Right.
Like,
Well, there's
here's our
not.
purity test, right?
Yeah, there's not 2,000 years of history behind it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Lots of wars yet,
Well,
but
and it's very fluid. It's just it's always changing. And
right. And
you know,
I think that, go
I
ahead. I didn't mean to cut
I
you off.
think I just think there's some elasticity to it, and
Right.
I think people's minds are more open to changing there.
Yeah.
You know?
And you can see that, like one of the things I've had many arguments with both my religious friends and the political friends is pretending that we haven't got more liberal socially is a disingenuous argument, because I straight up am from a place when I was 20 years old walking around campus where they were holding up signs saying God hates fags, and they were doing it with support, you know? And
Yeah.
that's a fundamentally different thing than than the kind of justified disdain
Yeah.
that people are getting now, and it's like I try to say there's work to be done, and I think part of that is going to come more from the comedians,
Mhm.
than anybody else, because it's the last bastion of free speech is the comic. The jester is the only one who's able to tell the truth if he makes you laugh, and regardless of where he is, that's where that stems from, and so I always thought as comedy is like, that's it, like you better go there if you got some shit to say and you're
I kind of
worried.
feel like that's always been the case, though. I mean, it comedian is a job that's only existed in the past 100 years, but before that you had, I mean, Mark Twain created the modern comic, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. The satire is genius.
yeah, well, and he went on all these tours just doing his little bits of wisdom and stuff in front of people after he got famous. He kind of did the Hunter Thompson thing where he stopped writing as much and just started like going out and feeding off the audience like a comic does.
Yeah,
Um, but those satirist writers like Mark Twain um, did serve the same function as
right.
comedians and as court jesters,
Yeah,
and they were able to get away with things in their time. I mean, this was a man in who was alive, who served in the Confederate Army for a short time. I mean,
right, right,
he was a deserter, but he um who lived through slavery
right.
and through some of the most dogmatic times in American history, and was writing about atheism in a
Yeah,
lot of his short stories. He was satirizing the church in a way that you couldn't talk shit about the church in the
yeah,
1870s when he was doing it. um and that's what comedians have done since vaudeville was a thing. um and it's what court gestures did back in the day. I think those
yeah.
guys have always been around.
Yeah. And we joke and use the term prophet, right? Like Chris Rock is a prophet because they're the ones who they tell you the truth, but they make you laugh at it. And there's all kinds of interesting scriptural reference to, like, I sent you my prophets and you laughed at them, right?
Right.
And so we would joke about, like, those are the best prophets, is the ones that can tell you the truth that hurts.
Hmm.
And then you laugh about it, but what does everybody do? Ah, that's so funny. Let's just go back to fucking work.
Right.
And it's like, oh, you actually heard something that, yes, it was comical, but it represented the absurdity of what you're doing in your own life and how you need to change that. And you didn't recognize it,
Right. Right.
And
Well,
those are my favorite.
yeah, which has always been fascinating to me about conservatives
Yeah.
is they'll watch Hollywood movies all day long and
Yeah.
or watch these crazy liberal comedians and laugh and love them and
Right.
completely miss what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing of, like, Fox, right? Had Fox
Mhm.
News, and it also had Married with Children. So it could bitch about Married with Children on Fox News.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they have the audacity. And I mean, if you if you
Well,
see the game,
the Simpsons in the early '90s were such
right?
a touchstone for the culture war,
Yeah,
and it
and
was
that's where they're fought.
yeah,
Like that's where their fault is in the entertainment, and I'm extremely thankful for that. I think that um, in a good way, there's that ebb and flow that you need, because there's some things that people on the right have that they have a point, like maybe we shouldn't spend all our money and not think about tomorrow.
right,
And then there's some points that people have on the left is maybe you should stop worrying about who I'm fucking. How about that? How about
yeah, yeah,
you want your small government? Why are they in my bedroom? You know? And it's
right,
just like, but like the way our minds kind of work is there are people who gravitate towards the arts, and there are those who gravitate towards the sciences and engineering. And
mhm,
very rarely do you have the ones that go in between the two. And we need both. Like we need the
yeah.
artist to draw that awesome machinery, but we need the fucking engineer to run it, because we're going to draw
Yeah.
more shit.
And
And that's
every once in a while, you get the writers of Futurama who are both.
right.
Uh,
Who can do everything.
yeah,
Oh, grown.
yeah. Um, let's talk about making movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Because where did you get into shooting?
So I'll summarize it as best I can. That company I was working at, Catch 22,
Yeah.
um, the only camera guy we had fell in love with some girl via the internet and moved to Mexico City. So we were a film company with no camera. And so I just took the lick and I took out a loan and I bought a camera, and I was like, we got to make this work, And my big thing was I'm really drawn to the arts and really drawn to creative people. And I'm not very much drawn into, it's not like I wouldn't work on a big production. Obviously, that'd be
Mhm.
wonderful. But there's just a different level of grind and irrational seriousness in those kind of productions when literally it's a bunch of adults playing pretend,
Yeah.
you know? And, and they take themselves super seriously. So I always wanted to do service work and then release my own productions, because I know I could have fun with them. I know I could goof
Mhm.
off. I could get who I'd want into. And that's kind of what I did. So I would do music videos or short films, film churches and weddings, just different things like that. And then the money I would make from that, I would reinvest either into our own albums or our own shorts,
Yeah.
and or getting new gear and just going that route, because I really wanted to be around. It sounds weird, but I always thought of myself as kind of like the stepping stone,
Mhm.
like when I come in, I work with an artist, whether it's in the visual medium or the audio medium, it's like, well, you're here because you need something from me that I know, right?
Mhm.
And I don't expect you to stay here forever. I expect you to learn from it and move on. Like
Right.
whenever all this started, one of the big things I would do, um, where I was from, was do artist consultation for musicians, because my big thing was, don't get stuck in a 360 deal with a label. You have all the tools now that are very affordable, and a record label is just an exorbitant loan. So you
Mhm.
can just get a small business loan, buy everything you want, pay it back cheaper, and then you can record for the rest of your life. And that's what I want for the artists that I would work with, is like sustainability on their own, so they don't have other people fucking up their art.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
same thing with visual field too. It's like you got to learn how to compartmentalize when the camera's off and when it's on. Why you have to exaggerate certain things. And I'd rather you learn it with me, because I'm willing to take the time, than you learn it on a budget of 50,000 an hour and now fucking people hate your guts, because
Yeah.
they will. I've seen it. you know.
Yeah. It's I this is something I think about a fair bit too, because the older you get, um
The less marketable you are.
the well, not just that, but like you reassess your goals, you realign, what you want to accomplish and how you want to accomplish it. It's
Yeah.
like, I'd fucking love a Netflix special. Is that likely
Right.
to happen? No. and that doesn't that's not even a critique of my talent, which I mean there are a lot of things you could say about how I do
Yeah.
stand up, why I won't get a Netflix special, but there's just the fact that I am 33 years old. I live in Colorado Springs. I'm not going to get on a TV show. I'm not going to get on a late night show, most likely. Therefore, I'm not going to get a Netflix special. What can I make for
Well,
my, you know, uh, there's, and what can I help build
right,
here? What can I do to make comedy a better environment in my city that's
right,
going to draw bigger names, that's going to help get local artists noticed, that's going to make the audiences better in this town.
yeah,
Which, like, when you arrived was really when we started. I feel like we really started cooking like gas with, or cooking with gas, in regards to the shows were getting better.
yeah,
Eric was booking more local comics at Looney's, which wasn't something that was happening as much
right,
before.
yeah,
Um, the I think that a lot of the comedy boom that had already been happening in much of the country was finally sort of trickling down to us, so that like
right,
comedy was something that was cool, that people would
right.
actually want to go, oh, we're going out this weekend, what's a fun date idea? I know, we'll go to a independent comedy show. you know
Right, yeah. But I mean, it's funny you mentioned that too, because I started, I guess like when I went to college, it broke me of the rock star dreams that I had when I was like in high school, you know?
Mm.
Because we all have them, like, oh yeah, I can be this. And then I realized like, oh well man, like even if I'm like the number one fucking death metal band in the world, I'm still making like 40K a year.
Right.
You know? And,
Yeah.
and not only am I making that little, I also spent 20 of it on the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I had a friend in the army who was he was the guitarist in Between the Buried and Me.
oh my
uh,
god, I love that band.
yeah, they're a great band, and he was a fucking mess and on drugs and stuff, and I think got a DUI, and the judge said jail or army, and he said army, and so he wasn't in the band anymore when they got big. uh or
There
as
you go.
big as a band like that can get. Yeah.
Right.
And he still talks to those guys, and they're like, yeah, we're basically living a middle class life.
Yeah, and they're the most successful ones, you
Yeah.
know, and that was it. Like that was um what got me to get on the other side of it, because when I went to school, I was going for a triple major, triple minor, and one of them was music media. And when I was at the university, the community college opened up a better program for the music media. So I just was like, fuck the program. Let me go do this.
Hmm.
And I was like, I need to get on the paying side of it, and I need to get on the side where I have ownership of what I create. And the more I started to learn about the business side, I was very thankful. One of my mentors, Eric Cager, runs the Music Business Institute in New Orleans. There's this festival called Cutting Edge Conference, and I met him, and he kind of took me under his wing. And I go there. I've been going there every year for over a decade, and it was doing that alone saved me tens of thousands of dollars in college. Like going to that thing for one weekend was the equivalent of going for an entire semester.
Wow.
And I realized I need to get on the production side of it. I need to pay attention to what's coming ahead. Like I knew about the Facebook algorithms before, because before they started running them, one of the people in charge of the AI for Facebook came down and talked to us. And they
Mhm.
were like, this is how musicians need to start clicking and thinking about how we're going to start doing things. And it was just, I just realized that because of the art that I'm attracted to, I have to build it myself. And um, I come at it from the other side, like, oh, it's not that I'll never get a Netflix. It's that by the time Netflix comes to me, I won't want to need them, you know?
Right.
Like they'll have to come to a point where it's, oh, there you are. All right.
Yeah.
Froze
Oh,
for a
was
second.
I?
Huh?
All right.
It's all right. It's all right. But
Okay. Okay.
yeah. So yeah, if the audio still worked with that, the point was that it's not that I don't think that any of us here could ever get a Netflix. It's that I hope whatever we create independently would be so good that Netflix would want it. You know,
Right.
like they would come to the things we create, because I found, and this happens a lot with musicians. I don't see it so much with comedians because there's not as many personalities in it.
Mm-hmm.
But the musicians, even as weird as the digital world is, there's still this belief that they'll be discovered, right?
Right.
And those days are over. Like that's
Yeah.
done. You know, like there might be that freak incident where that one guy gets found or that one woman gets found and it's great. But the likelihood of that is so small. And now that you have all the tools and access your own, it's like, you know, by the time any of those companies come to you, you would hope that you've established yourself enough to where you keep your art.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
And,
I mean, that's kind of the mentality I've been working with, just because like I'm trying to create enough things that when one of them hits, it creates a domino effect.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Many matches in the fire, you know?
exactly, I did the album, which, doesn't make a lot of money. It gets views every day, which is,
Sure.
after a year as an
Yeah.
independent, you know, artist at all, like that's surprising.
Yeah.
But people listen to it every day, not a lot, but some people listen to it every day. um the I've been writing. I'm trying to put out a couple things independently this year and then shop around a book to see if a publisher will pick it up.
Nice.
And if by the end of the year nobody does, I'll probably self-publish that as well.
Right.
And then I've got the podcast and doing stand-up, and I'm just hoping if enough people read that book and they find the stand-up album or they find the podcast, the synergy will start generating some sort of income.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the only way to do it now as an artist. I mean, and I tell people that musicians predominantly is like, you really have to think about your team bigger than just being musicians now. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with comedy. You can just write jokes if you want, but you are stagnating. You're going to limit where you go now, because now people are, and it doesn't matter. Like sometimes we shut down ourselves because we worry about things like having a $10 million production, when some of the most popular people making a shit ton of money are only using their cell phone, you know?
Right.
And there's different tricks. Like the way I do it, like for the Hopeless stuff, every time I do any video, it's not like I'm getting money from YouTube for the videos, because to get partnered on YouTube, you have to have 4,000 hours of viewership before they'll even let you monetize. But because I'm a musician, I just run my songs under whatever I'm doing, and they have to pay me from that. So
Right.
that's kind of how I do it with all the stuff that I do, is just try to get content and throw my music on the background. And that's really what a lot of it is, because they can't circumvent that, because ASCAP is a large enough company where they'll fight them over it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like the US sucks in the way they pay residuals and royalties. So like I'll do like you, like when I get a check for 17 cents and I realize that I get 1,000th of a penny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The good thing is, well, it sucks because that's 17 cents. But the good thing is that means 17,000 people checked out this song.
Right. Right.
And so it shows me that there's a market. But now the trick is I have to find the way to reach them directly. And that's and that's what I think we can all kind of do. And both. And again, for me, it's like I fell into so many of the things that I'm involved in now. Like I fell into doing film. I wasn't doing it at first. And probably music was the only thing that I did with intent. And now I'm doing comedy with intent because I went to a venue and they were like, how many people are here? Why are you here? And I was like, well, I'm trying to test a lot of my content for sketches. And I said that and I realized, well, that doesn't help the club out. Like the club
Right.
owner doesn't give a shit about my fucking,
Oh, they give
media
a shit
channel.
about chicken fingers, man.
Right. Yeah. They got to sell beer. And so then I was like, okay, you know what? I need to not waste these people's time. So then I started taking it much more seriously about 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, where it's like, okay, I need to start writing and actually try to book stuff and,
Mm.
use all of the skill sets that I have from the music world and kind of transfer them into the comedy world and knock the rust off and just get better at it. Because one of the things is like, I'm not the best, but I know I don't suck, you know? And I know, like, I've seen motherfuckers suck. I've seen people, and everybody will have a night where they eat shit, but I've seen people that just straight eat shit for fucking months and quit. Like they
Yeah.
realize, okay, there's nothing here.
Well,
And
what's weird, and on those bad days, you think it's you, but those guys who suck for years and years and years and never ever stop. and
and they're doing the
and
same 3 minutes from six
yeah,
years ago.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's always a weird thing to see. But it's also the beautiful thing about stand-up comedy is anybody can do an open mic, literally
Yep.
anyone, you know.
Yep.
Um, but
Thank God.
thank God, because nobody would have given me a shot.
No, you got to take them, bro.
Yeah. Um, well, let me ask you this, and we'll start wrapping up.
Yeah.
This has been a good conversation. If you had maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice to give somebody, and somebody's name is Andrew, um, uh, some advice to give somebody who's trying to figure out how to make a living at all this, what do you think you'd tell them?
I mean, one, you got to just perseverance and as discover as many different avenues to find a way to make money off of your art. And then there's no plan B, but that doesn't mean the plan you have now is the right one, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there's this amazing songwriter and poet named Malik Youssef. And once he told me, he was like, there's no plan B, Johnathan, because if there's a plan B, that means you've already prepared in your mind to fail.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, so that doesn't mean that your plan is, I'm going to be the best singer in the world. It means I'm going to be a singer, right? And he's like, so that means you got to take all those steps. And that's what you have to do for your life, because nobody's like, well, I'm going to be a doctor. And then they stop their 9th year in medical school. It's like they go, you do it. And when everybody talks about the 1%, it's easy for us to get jaded because the 1% entertainment is celebrities. So you hear about them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the 1% exists in every single field. There's only 1% of doctors that make millions of dollars. There's only 1% of engineers that are at the top. And it's going to be the same with entertainment. But that doesn't mean there aren't tens of thousands of other people living a solid life, paying their mortgage and doing all those things. And the other side, I guess the best advice though, for me to anybody in the entertainment industry is study the business side of it. Like get your booking contracts together, get your understand what you're willing to sell of your image, right? And then of course all the little tricks will come too. Like let's say you have I learned this from another comic the other day. Say you have your comedy album, right? And you've got 10 tracks, but each one of your bits is 2 minutes, but it could really be 4 bits in that 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you get paid
Yep.
for 30 seconds or 2 minutes. So
Yep.
you might as well cut it up to 30 seconds.
Right.
And that doesn't work with songs, but that works with jokes. And I was like, that's
Well,
genius, right?
and jokes don't get listened to nearly as often as songs do. So
Right.
yeah, no, you're 100% right there, and that's not something I realized until about 3 months after I put my album out, is that it's a 10-track album and it probably should be a 15-track album.
Yeah.
Just because that's 5 more
Right.
streams of revenue.
5 more streams. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as many different digital distributors that you can get your hold
Mhm.
on, do it. I mean, that's my advice, is just do your best to take it and find really supportive people who get that this is work. Like one of the hardest things for entertainers in general is, if the carpenter's having a slow month, nobody thinks he's a shitty carpenter.
Right.
Right. But with entertainment, people only see the finished product. And so they assume that it's all talent. And yes, you have to have talent to be able to use the rhetoric to get people on your side in whatever entertainment field you're in. But I mean, it's a skill set. And so I urge everybody to just look at it like that. It's a skill set, and there's a formula, and it doesn't mean you have to be formulaic in your approach, but especially in comedy, there's a psychology to it. It's about human behavior, and that's a science. And a lot of comedians are behaving like social psychologists without even knowing it. They're doing all these tricks, and they just have that kind of natural gift. But that would be my advice, is just take your art like you would take your shitty day job. It's just care about it that much. You know? And then if you end up being the professional hobbyist, even better. Like if you can afford to pay for just your family's vacation because you go tell jokes for 2 hours, and that's the only gig that you got that year, who gives a fuck, bro? You got a free vacation.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of looked at it, is that way. Like you create baby steps, so your success isn't Netflix or nothing.
Right.
Maybe it's like, I'll play it in Denver, or I just want to play I want to get paid to perform somewhere in this city,
Yeah.
and that's your step, and go from there. So that's my advice. And then all the contract shit is annoying, but get an entertainment lawyer if you don't want to do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's a baby step in and of itself.
But it's a super important one that people don't. Yeah, but it's true. Like, I mean, because they're expensive, dude. Like it's $100 an hour, and you're like, well, I'm just gonna call you 1 hour for 6 months. That's what it's gonna be. But I mean, those are things that a lot of people get caught up in, because there are a lot of extremely talented, wonderful people who got destroyed by their contracts, who got destroyed by the industry because they were just caught unaware.
Every blues musician ever.
Right.
Yeah. Oh man, thanks for doing this, man. Thanks for
appreciate you having me,
with me. Insightful stuff. I appreciate you talking about the business stuff too, because I'm getting locals for the most part. I'm not trying to get famous people on this show really, and so having somebody who takes the business side of this really seriously is refreshing, and I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it, man. Like for me, ultimately, when I started my company, by the way, Forgotten Profit Studio.
Yeah,
when
please
I started,
plug all the shit.
So Forgotten Profit Studio, Jason and the Krugers, another project coming out that my wife and I are working on. It's untitled yet, but it's coming out. It's going to be some more kind of like crazy Halloween horror type shit. And then check out the Toy Gory franchise. I'm excited to be a part of that. And that's it. And what I was going to say is that's why I started my whole company, was because I want everyone who's driven by the arts to be able to succeed, because there's a place for it.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Thank you so much. As for my stuff, mindfulofmadness.com for the writing. The albums, This Was a Bad Idea. It's on Spotify and iTunes and all that jazz. And please rate, review, and subscribe, because I want to make money at this one day. Thanks, Johnathan. Appreciate you, man. I'll see you soon. I'll see you at a show soon.
Yeah, certainly, man. I appreciate it. It's good to see you too.
All right.
All right. Have a good one.
Yep. Go make stuff, everybody.